Good evening and welcome to this talk. Welcome to the third Enzo Grilli lecture. We are most grateful to the Center for American Studies for hosting us here for this Enzo Grilli lecture. And first of all, I would like to ask to the director of the Center for American Studies, Mr. Paolo Messa, to take the floor for his welcoming remarks. Thank you, Paolo.
Thanks to you, dear Giovanni, dear Professor Farese. It's a great honor and privilege for the Center for American Studies to hosting you for this lecture. It's also a great pleasure to having Professor McCann here at the Center for talking about the negotiation on Brexit, which is a very timely debate. I think we are also timely in order to have a start for this lecture. So I would like to renew my thanks, and I'll give the floor to Giovanni for introducing Professor McCann and then starting to debate. Thank you so much.
Thanks you again, Paolo, for hosting us. So, first of all, I would like to say something about the Enzo Grilli lecture. This is the third Enzo Grilli lecture, traditionally organized by the Fondazione Malfa, and this year co-organized with the European University of Rome. Enzo Grilli was a development economist who worked in and for institutions, both at the national and the international level. Most notably, he was executive director both at the IMF and the World Bank in the 1990s. It is perhaps less known that Enzo Grilli was also a passionate book collector, and he collected thousands of books, rare and precious books, in the line of great Italian economists, including Luigi Einaudi. So he accumulated a most precious collection, stretching from 1600 to these days. And upon his death, the Grilli family, donated this rare collection of books to the Fondazione La Malfa, where this collection is currently hosted. A second note on the topic of today's talk, of today's Grilli lecture. It is very popular these days, Brexit. Brexit was one of the words of the year 2016, interestingly with fake news and post-truth. Brexit is a story of paradoxes. Let me mention just three of them. The first one, the European country once considered the most outward-looking and globalized, now fractured by the backlash against the very model that made Britain strong. The second paradox is the political bet by a Conservative Party leader, namely David Cameron, probably paving the way unexpectedly to a Labour Party leader, namely Jeremy Corbyn. And third, the call for making Great Britain great again, that might end up in the worst possible scenario with the break or the changing, or a change in Great Britain as we know it. Some have been talking about Little Britain, with divisions around the Scottish border and namely the Irish border coming back. So there is a sense of confusion, uncertainty, and bewildering, and most of us do not know what Great Britain is anymore, or what Brexit is actually anymore. So our guest, Professor Gerard McCann, is a senior lecturer at St. Mary's University College, Belfast, affiliated with Queen's University, Belfast. He's been lecturing widely on European affairs He's been following European affairs for nearly 30 years now. He's been lecturing across Europe and the United States. He's the author of An Economic History of Ireland, published in 2001 in London. He will also be bringing to this discussion his viewpoint as a citizen and scholar living and working in north of Ireland, where the issue of the Irish border I was referring to is obviously of the utmost importance. And obviously he will put this in a larger context, including the European and transatlantic perspective. So Professor McCann, to whom we are very grateful, will be talking for roughly 30 to 35 minutes, and then we will open the discussion with Mr. Riccardo Perisic, former Director General of Industry at the European Commission and currently Vice President at the Council for Italy and US Relations, to whom I'm also very grateful, and with Professor Giorgio La Malfa, former Minister of European Affairs and currently sitting in the Board of Trustees of Fondazione La Malfa. We will then open the discussion to the floor, and we will come back to Professor McCann for his final reply. So thank you for accepting this invitation. Thank you, Gerard, for being here. You have the floor.
Honour, esteemed professors, Mr. President there, ladies and gentlemen. For me, this is a privilege to be able to present a case, an argument, in regards to what is perhaps the most difficult moment in British history since the Second World War. I will work to try and justify that comment. But it has been divisive, it has been immensely problematic for all concerned. My tenure in this goes back to studying the common market many years ago in Queen's University. I've been teaching about the European Union for 20 years and more. And it has been, from my perspective, enlightening. It's been a privilege to be working on this as a subject. And it's, in a way, for the likes of myself, it has shocked me that the opinions that traditionally would have been what we call fringe in British politics have come so forcefully to the fore in the past number of years. To my mind, it doesn't represent the interests of Britain to be out of the European Union, my perspective. Likewise, when you calculate the referendum in terms of the electorate, in terms of the votes, it was 37% of the population voted to leave the European Union. That is an issue that needs to be at least answered by government and by I think the media and the politicians and the full establishment that has been part and parcel of this. One other aspect of my involvement here is in regards to the Enzo Grilli lecture. Now, for 20 years, his books have been sitting on my desk. I use them as textbooks for my students. I refer to them. I understand the idea that economics and development go together. And I think that that is something that the likes of myself and others working in the university system should articulate more. Likewise, the lessons we can learn from economic history, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, my world is quite unusual in terms of the British context. My mother was a war orphan who came over from the bombings in Scotland in 1940 and came to the bombings in Ireland in 1941. I've had uncles who engaged with the movement of D-Day. I've had an uncle, a great uncle, who went down in the first action by the British Navy in the North Sea. And my lifetime has been structured by an understanding of Europe that is liberated from war. That's where it was framed for me. And it's something that I think we need to fully appreciate in Britain to understand where the trajectory of this Brexit process is taking us. When Article 50 is triggered on the 29th of March 2017, it not only states that in practical terms the UK is intending to leave the European Union, but in political terms, I see with Article 50 the break of the post-war consensus. It is something that has sustained peace and liberty and prosperity in Europe since the 1950s. I know the limitations of European integration. I know the limitations of the European Union, but it has held us as people together for that period of time. Brexit carries forward a problem. I'm not the only one who thinks this, and I'll just list people who were in the Remain camp of the European debate as well. All previous Prime Ministers of the UK and opposition leaders, all main political parties, all other 27 leaders of the European Union wanted to remain in the UK, to remain in the European Union. Barack Obama, all major business leaders, including the Confederation of British Industry, which represents 190,000 businesses, and the Institute of Directors, all university vice-chancellors, all trade unions. Even the security forces broke ranks to make their opinions felt. Rarely do you hear MI5 and MI6 saying anything, yet they come out to voice an opinion around the difficulties and security aspects of Brexit. And as an Irish person, the most important commentator on this was the bookmakers, who rarely ever would chance their own finances in terms of these issues. And from William Hill bookmakers, there was an 80% chance of a Remain win in that referendum. The vote was a shock. It wasn't expected. It was something that we woke up to, realizing that there had been a seismic change in politics in Britain overnight. And it left a couple of legacies. Immediately we could see what was going to happen. Scotland voted to stay in the European Union. Northern Ireland voted to stay in the European Union. London voted to stay in the European Union. Where I live, 75% of people voted to stay. Yet, because of confusion around the campaign, because of some legitimate understandings of the difficulties of being in the European Union, concerns around migration, which come up continually in the debate. People, by and large, in the cities around London, outside London, voted to leave the European Union. It was almost a template for the breakup of the UK in its own right. And we saw that immediately. Within a day, we had the Scottish Nationalist Party calling for a new referendum on Scottish independence. We heard Irish Republicans coming forward talking about the need for Northern Ireland to be carried off into a united Ireland. These debates we had managed, and they re-emerged very, very quickly. Now, I have quite a lot of information here, but I'm going to just select what I think is the key moments, the key points, the key policy markers in terms of the development and evolution and rollout of the Brexit process, as it has become known. The UK has been in the European community from the 1st of January 1973. The first referendum in June 1975 had 67% of the population saying they wanted to be a part of the European community. The issue was resolved at that point. Subsequent to that, there were problems. There were problems with the issue of the exchange rate mechanism. There were problems with the rebate, where Margaret Thatcher very famously went over to Brussels and demanded her money back, which was very popular at the time. You had the UK being forced out of the exchange rate mechanism. The UK stays outside the Eurozone. You had the establishment of political lobbies and indeed a new political party called the Referendum Party, which had one single issue to work with, and that is to get Britain out of the European Union. Just to check that, in its first election, it got 3% of the vote. In the European elections of 2014, that 3% had risen to 27% of the vote under the auspices of the United Kingdom Independence Party. The Conservatives, fearing the loss of votes, got back to the idea of a referendum. Let's revisit this. Let's put it to the population. It's too divisive for the political party to deal with. And certainly within the Conservative Party, the danger of Europe has always been there. It caused the collapse of the Heath prime ministerial position. It caused the collapse of Margaret Thatcher. It caused the collapse of John Major. Quite possibly, it was going to cause the collapse of the prime ministership of David Cameron as well. David Cameron went over to Brussels in January 2013 and came back with quite a hard Eurosceptic understanding of the situation. I understand the issues. I understand where the Conservative Party was coming from in regards to this. The European Union needs criticism. The European Union needs checked. It needs assertion from member states. But whenever David Cameron comes back, it's the idea of ever closer union that is questioned. And that brings me back to that point about the post-war consensus being broken at that point. The referendum puts in train a process, and that process is towards the removal, in effect, of the British economy and British politicians from European Union politics and economic development. Article 50 gives a 2-year limit to the negotiations. The other 27 member states met to discuss this, and from what I hear back from those discussions, there was, again, disbelief, shock that the UK could think of withdrawing from this as an initiative. There had to be a draft deal, and that's what the negotiations are about at this point. There had to be a repeal act where the UK would formally, through the auspices of the House of Commons, repeal the act which originally brought Britain into the European Union in 1972. Withdrawal would need the approval of at least 20 EU countries, or 65% of the population, and ratification is needed through the European Parliament. The outcome of this is to try and get to a position where you copy EU laws into the UK legal system. And at that point, you can start changing, adapting, or getting rid of what you perceive to be bad law. That's the intention. The white paper of the 2nd of February 2017 gives us a better understanding of what is happening. The title of it even suggests where the UK is moving towards. The title being, the UK's exit from a new partnership with the EU. The approach was to address legislation, to address economic activity in a manner that would be least harmful to the British economy in particular and the British legal system. So that was the intention of this paper that was introduced by the government. The White Paper's negotiation points include some of the ideas that were argued during the Brexit campaign, including taking back control, strengthening the Union, and that is not the European Union, that is Britain and Northern Ireland as a union. Controlling immigration, I mean, we hear these points across Europe, and we know that this is an issue for people, and we know it's been badly managed right across Europe. It's a key point in terms of negotiations. It leaves, just to step aside, it leaves the likes of me in quite a difficult sort of position. I've been born in the UK, I live in the UK, my family have always been there, yet with an Irish passport, am I included in this? Or as some people would say, you have to have a new arrangement, a new legal arrangement around citizenship. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult situation for a lot of people, including the likes of 1 million Polish people who live in England in particular. You have protecting workers' rights. You have securing new trade agreements. Cooperation in the fight against crime and terrorism. The issue that vexed the security forces. They are struggling to find out how will they deal with this? How will they deal with the flow of people? How will they deal with the issues of terrorism? How will they deal with the re-emergence of Irish terrorism, for example, which is a possibility because of this? Ultimately, and I have to say I don't envy Theresa May's position in this. Ultimately, there has to be a smooth, orderly exit. And that is what the problem will be in terms of rolling out the Brexit strategy for the government. It can be reflected in the negotiations. It can be reflected in the way in which the active negotiations did not start for almost a year. Having an insight into our civil servants and what way they have been thinking about this, their view was they didn't expect this to happen. There is 1,200 EU regulations that have to be deconstructed, unpicked. And the headache of all of this, to overcome that headache would take time. But time is not there because there is this 2-year limit. 3 things come out, mentioned by the UK Chancellor Philip Hammond at the Mansion House in London. The first is in regards to trade, particularly in goods and services. The second is the mutually beneficial financial transitional arrangements. Very complicated, but it basically means how much money is the UK going to give Brussels to get out of the club. Those discussions are actually taking place today, so I haven't heard the figure that has been agreed. I don't think it'll be agreed today, by the way, but there was supposed to be a figure coming forward in the region of 30 to 40 billion euros. Initially, the European Commission had thought it would be 160 billion. That was what was being discussed. It's been chipped away, and the offer on the table by David Davis was 20 billion euros. So, as usual with politics, there's a haggling over money. And the final thing is the customs arrangements and the cross-border aspects, particularly in relation to the Irish situation. Now, part of our peace process, and as you know, we had quite a difficult 30-year conflict. Part of our peace process was to ensure that Ireland would have a seamless border. There would be no troops, there would be no barriers to movement, no barriers to trade. It's embedded in our Good Friday Agreement. This puts a question over that, because people are now talking about building walls, building customs houses, having troops on the border. We will deal with that in our part of the world in terms of the peace process. We've, myself included, working to try to encourage our politicians to participate in active peace building. We will get on with that business. But we would expect Westminster, and we would expect Brussels to understand the complications of the Irish border and to give us some, the term we're using, spatial arrangement on the island of Ireland. First round of talks, beginning in July, were a bit difficult from what I hear. The UK government's Brexit secretary, David Davis, only stayed 1 hour. there was two opinions coming out, and I can take either or, that he was relaxed about it, getting things started, or he wasn't prepared. The civil servants still had not got their material together on this. In rounds 2 and 3, substantive issues emerge. Finance. What they called a divorce settlement. Again, fighting over money. Fighting over a figure to divorce. You have, just to move on there, the free movement of people. One of the core principles of the Treaty of Rome. The ability of people to move freely across these economies, these countries, to build their lives in different countries. Will Brexit close that down? Now, we do have assurances that particularly skilled workers will be protected in any arrangement. And that has been a relief to a lot of people, including quite a lot of the university staff, academics, researchers, who really did not know what their position would be after March 2019. There have been reassurances there. The issue of migration stands as an issue. I really don't know how they will come to a consensus around dealing with migration. The comparisons being, you know, the numbers of people who have come in Italy, the million people who went into Germany. In terms of the arrangement for the UK, the initial figure was 20,000 people. I know in our own country we had 52 Syrian refugees brought in. And that is a difficult, humanitarian position to take. Right, there are position papers on this. I won't go into the detail about these. The position papers go through various aspects of those three key issues. What is noticeable about these position papers is that from the UK government's perspective, the fine detail needs to be concluded. I mean, they're very effective civil service documents. And I know where it's coming from. I know what the instinct is there, and to give some space for adaptation. But we are looking to fine detail. There were additional papers, including papers on goods and services, the European Court, the civil judicial cooperation, data, and confidentiality. These were perceived to be almost a second level importance to those three initial key issues. In return, it's a bit like a tennis match. In return, 27 position papers are produced by the European Commission, and they respond to the UK's position papers. And it's, as I say, it's a bit like a tennis match, watching ideas flowing back and forward across the English Channel. But again, we can see information. We couldn't see this for a year after the Brexit vote. We can now see the information emerging. You also had Prime Minister May's September speech, and that gives some clarification as well. And I think in terms of just one quote that I picked up on, and it showed a post-Brexit world in a way where there is this idea that Britain could develop out of this and could emerge stronger eventually because of this referendum. And that is, quote, "The eyes of the world are on us, but if we can be imaginative and creative about the way we establish this new relationship, if we can proceed on the basis of trust in each other, I believe we can be optimistic about the future we can build for the United Kingdom and for the European Union." So there's a sense of we are almost softening our approach. We're getting there. We have a problem, but we will get there. And I think, in a way, the Florence speech gave people in Britain a better understanding and some hope, I think, which is important in this context. Back to the negotiations. In the negotiations, you have ongoing bickering between the politicians involved. You have the divide within the Conservative Party re-emerging, and an attempt to try to oust Theresa May, the Prime Minister. You have the influence of the Democratic Unionist Party, which is our local political party in Northern Ireland. It is in coalition with the Conservative Party, and it is immensely pro-Brexit. It wants nothing to do with the European institutions whatsoever. The Labour Party has stayed relatively silent, possibly positioning itself for government whenever the Conservative government collapses, which could be any time, as we understand it. And there's also the discussion among the other 27 member states, who all have a say in this and who can all frustrate this process if they feel it is in their interest. Is Brexit inevitable? That's the big question. The OECD in October called for a second referendum, one that would reverse the previous vote, stating that Brexit would undermine UK economic growth, but that a reversal would be a boost for economic activity. Some people picked up on this. Some very influential voices in British politics picked up on this, including Tony Blair, David Miliband, who was the Foreign Secretary, who would have engaged and negotiated in and around the Lisbon Treaty. You have other political parties, such as the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party, the Scottish Nationalist Party, Sinn Féin, and the Social Democratic and Labour Party, all arguing the case for a second referendum. And you also have a number of academics presenting this case, led by Professor Vernon Bogdanor of King's College, London, who, in my field of European affairs, is one of the most focused minds on this issue. There needs to be a withdrawal bill moving towards an act of Parliament. That is currently at the committee stage for negotiation. The second reading of this was passed on the 11th of September 2017. The votes are interesting. 226 members of Parliament voted for, 290 voted against. If there's any shift in that balance of power, you will see a very volatile Conservative government. Lord John Kerr intervenes, and this is really bringing us up to date. On the 11th of November, the Prime Minister announced that the EU withdrawal bill would be amended to formally commit to Brexit at 11 o'clock GMT on Friday, the 29th of March 2019. Lord Kerr is an interesting person. He is the UK advisor on the European Union. He is a drafter of Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, and he is a senior crossbench peer, an immensely well-respected mind within government and the civil service in the UK. He stated that the UK could rescind the repeal bill at any stage up until that date and stay in the European Union. That is, ask for the letter back. Excuse me. The internal legal advice is very interesting. First, we weren't able to get access to it. Leaks from within the Cabinet Office to Jessica Seymour QC noted that the advice that was given was that the Article 50 notification, my computer has just died on me, so I'll need to shift around. Okay, yeah. Article 50 notification can be withdrawn by the UK at any time before the 29th of March 2019, resulting in the UK remaining in the EU on its current favourable terms. This position would tally with that of Lord Kerr. Jean-Claude Paris, the former Director General of the EU Council's Legal Service, and Martin Selmar, the lawyer representing the European Commission's President's Office. Now, Martin Selmar is very interesting in that he really is leading the legal understanding of this. And I would say if I was to get a continental perspective on the Brexit negotiations, it would be Martin Selmar I would listen to. Now, this is the options. We have a soft Brexit, or we have a hard Brexit. I don't think anyone at all perceived the Brexit vote to be a hard Brexit. That is, the UK crashing out of the European Union. It would be, I use this term advisedly, it would be catastrophic for many businesses in particular. You have the legal reversal, I have mentioned that. That is, you send another letter to say, we have reconsidered this and we would like to maybe extend our transition period, extend our discussion around Brexit. A new referendum, immensely controversial, as I'm sure you agree. There is a lobby that is building around that. There is a protracted transition, that is, after the 29th of March, you go into a transition period that could be 10 years, 15 years. It would soften it immensely if that period was extended. You have the Norwegian model, which is where you buy into the European Union. You be a part of it, but you don't necessarily have political representation. That would be interesting to a lot of people on the Brexit side, and particularly the softer understanding of Brexit. The Swiss model, which is moving more towards distance. No deal at all, and crashing out. Anywhere on that spectrum, there are arguments and justifications. Anywhere on that spectrum, the UK could be in 2 or 3 years' time. When we go through the negotiation documents, we can see ideas vacillating across this particular series of options. Parts of it reminiscent of what Norway went through, parts of it what the Swiss went through. We can hear calls for a referendum. At this stage, we don't know. The negotiations are ongoing, important, and let's see how that works out. At this point, for those of us working in this subject, those of us who have an understanding of this subject, we are still shocked that this happened. We understand that it has happened. We understand that that democratic impulse has to be respected. And the options that are put before us, we need to work on to clarify which is the best. I do have my own opinions on it, but this is not the forum to voice those. But just to say that with each of those options, there is a legitimate position. And it is they're being increasingly voiced in a more articulate way, certainly more articulate than at any time since this discussion around the withdrawal from the European Union started. Now, just a few other quick thoughts. The first is to revisit that point that Brexit quite possibly is the start of a problem around the breakup of the post-war consensus. It's challenging the very principles set out in the Treaty of Rome. And the second is a warning from history. And for that, I will move to someone who quite a number of us here are quite fond of in regards to the legacy of protectionism, the legacy of confrontation, and that is from John Maynard Keynes. And this goes back to a statement made in Trinity College, Dublin in 1933. And I'll read it out. I know it's a bit small. Those who seek to disembarrass a country of its entanglements should be very slow and wary. It should not be a matter of tearing up roots. Italy, Ireland, Germany have cast their eyes or are casting them towards new modes of political economy. Many more countries after them I predict, will seek one by one after new economic gods. We do not know what will be the outcome. That is John Maynard Keynes in Dublin in 1933. When we break up something as integrate, something as developed as the European Union, if we delegitimize that, we don't have a proper understanding, I think, of what the outcome of that will be. And Brexit really does something quite problematic here, in that it moves towards these new gods, this new alternative system, which could lead us anywhere. And I will leave it at that, on that quite controversial final note. So thank you very much for listening.